Hey everybody, welcome back to Jury Trial Mentor. My name is John. I'm your host. I'm talking here with my brother Carl, the experienced criminal trial attorney. And let's start off right away, Carl, with a YouTube channel that has mentioned that this was a well choreographed murder. What do you say to that? Do you agree with that assessment?
I do not. I mean, it looked like that way to the Adelsons for the first 2 years until there was arrests that were made and then the bump following that. And so far we have 3 folks that are in jail that are convicted of taking part in the murder, another one on trial, and there's more trials to follow after that.
Yeah, and you add to it, not just the people that are incarcerated now or will be incarcerated in our opinion, but just look at also the secondary effects. Look at all the children that are right now today without parents because of this so-called well choreographed murder. Right, from the kids of Katie and Sigfredo's down to, of course, the Dan Markel sons. It's just a downrange effect of this terrible decision of the Adelsons to decide to eliminate Dan at all costs. Carl, the fact that Charlie is a dentist from a wealthy family, is that going to make any difference in his treatment in prison if he, as you and I both believe, he'll be convicted in the fall or not?
I expect there to be a lot of pressure on Charlie coming from multiple different avenues. First of all, you have multiple different types of gangs. When you go to prison, they're going to try to take control over Charlie and do things to him that he's going to be in extreme duress over. And what's very unique about it, the fact that everybody's going to know about him. He's not going to be just a normal murderer coming to prison. He's going to be known as the doctor murderer coming there, and coming from a family with wealth is going to pose a risk not only to him, but also to the other Adelsons, if you stop to think about it, because not only are they going to try to extract money out of Charlie in exchange for protection from being raped and whatnot, but you're talking about there could be other bumps being placed on some of the other Adelsons. Just like they did a bump on Donna, this time it'd be a real bump from one of the, maybe a Latin King member or maybe an Aryan Nation type of thug that's going to come after him and try to extract money after him. So I would expect, as we've seen Charlie's house be on the market, Judy, the YouTube lawyer, posted on her AA Legal Focus channel. I think there's going to be probably in the very near future, probably within 4 to 6 months after Charlie's convicted, that you'll see his parents putting their house, their condo, high-rise condo up for sale as well. Because I think of that very reason, they're going to be facing threats. They'll probably have to pay for their own attorneys when they get arrested as well. So whether the bump is asking them for specific money or from Charlie directly, the way I could see this working out is they put a bump on, let's say, Donna, she's walking down the street, and they say, your son is going to be knifed in the next week if you don't come up $50,000. So what I foresee happening is basically they're just going to bleed the Adelsons dry. So you have these rival factions that are going to be coming against him. So the real terror won't even start until he actually goes to prison. So I don't know if they thought of this, but it's not well planned out, because really bad things are going to be happening to threaten them and extorting them for money. And the thing is, what these threats that are coming at them won't know is, have they really exhausted all their resources? So if they sell all their properties and cash everything out to pay off these threats, what's going to happen then when they run out of money?
I can see this happening. I can see one of the gangbangers say, look, they're worth millions. Well, millions can be 2, it can be 6, but to them, all it means is that these guys are loaded, so let's press as much as we can. And if it's $5,000 per month, let's say a payoff, what's to prevent that from going to 10? Correct?
Right. So
or
they
15?
just don't know, and they're just going to assume it's an endless trough of money to go after him for. So Charlie's running out of assets. It looks like if he's got to sell his house, he's going to probably have to pay another $1 million or more for appellate fees if he tries to appeal his conviction. And so all these kind of things are really going to put pressure on him, because you just don't see somebody with money and with a doctorate degree coming into prison. And so he's gonna face something that's very rare. And state prisons, they're pretty rough. If he was in federal prison, he wouldn't have to worry about gangs coming after him and whatnot. There's a lot of structure, there's a lot of discipline. But you're talking about like maximum security type prisons in a state like Florida, highly populated. And he's going to be faced with lifers as well. So lifers don't have anything to lose, right? So, and a lot of these people have had struggled their whole life. They're going to look at it as being like a good payback against society, being able to threaten a doctor and or his family.
So it sounds to me like Charlie coming into the Florida state penitentiary system was almost like fresh meat to these
That's
inmates.
how they'll look at it, because you just don't see that kind of thing in prison.
So you've never seen in your experience a really wealthy or a PhD or an MD or a dentist like Charlie come through this system?
Never seen. You only see that once in a while, like a 20/20 or Dateline, where somebody is facing that kind of confinement and sentence from a murder of a family member, something like that.
I would think that if I was his defense attorney, Raschbaum, in this case, I would know this, and I would let Charlie know to maybe convince him to plead out a deal or something? Or is this something, in your opinion, that Raschbaum has even let Charlie know? Do you think this is even on his radar?
I don't know that that's something an attorney would necessarily talk about with him, but it's something that that Charlie, since he has all that institutional knowledge of the way the criminal justice system works, he might be able to figure that out himself. But he's not going to face those kind of pressures in a county jail. From my experience, county jails, there's too much of a transient nature. Most of them are misdemeanors. Mm-hmm. The felonies, crimes that folks are facing, a lot of them plead out shortly. They're not there for long before they go to the state prison. Some held out for trial like Charlie, and they're there for a lot longer. But you just don't see rich people not bonding out of jail if they are charged with a serious felony.
So you're saying basically Charlie, his physical safety could be protected, but it's going to come at a steep financial price. In other words, there'll be a guy in prison that says, hey man, I will help you, I'll keep all these gangbangers away from you, but here's what it's going to cost you. I need $10,000 wired every month. Is it something like that, or?
But there could be a warring faction going on to establish that control where he doesn't have that protection initially, and so there may be fighting over him. God. So that's the unique difference that I think is so hard to predict. How long is fighting over him going to last, and what are they going to do to him? And maybe he'll have to pay off several of them to make them all happy. Maybe they'll have a coalition where they agree to all split at a certain amount. So
this is almost like a gold mine for the inmates there, wherever he decides to go.
It's sort of like already winning the lottery. It's just a matter of how much you're going to get.
Well, then I'm thinking, we mentioned Donna, but it's not just Donna who's facing physical harm potentially. It's also Harvey. I mean, why would they exclude Harvey in something like this if they're trying to extort money out of the Adelsons? Or is that not how criminal mind thinks?
I think any one of them could be targeted for a bump or targeted for something that threatens their lives, not just Charlie's. So that's the thing. When you plan a murder and you bring Latin gang members from the South Miami area, and you bring in other folks that are willing to kill people, what's not to stop them from turning on you? Mm-hmm. So that's the whole thing. And we already know that Luis Rivera is worried about going to the state prison because he feels like his life is in danger. So imagine how word is going to travel among the gangs about Charlie coming to prison. And so it's just going to be a free-for-all. It's going to be, I predict, a shark frenzy among the different turf kings of whatever prison he goes to. And it's going to be sheer terror and most likely violence as well until the payoffs are at least settled. But then there can also be turmoil among that as well, and maybe somebody initially agrees and then they don't, and so it's going to be a living nightmare.
What about this aspect? Luis Rivera gets out of jail in 5 years. Isn't there a chance, being that he's a member of the Latin Kings, he'll be so irate the fact that he served additional years in prison over their bumbling this whole entire murder, that will he have maybe an incentive? Maybe not himself personally, because I don't strike him as a guy that's going to want to keep his risks up in getting back in prison, but couldn't he, being a part of the Latin Kings, also want a vendetta against the Adelsons, or is that not a possibility?
Well, I don't see him being involved with the Latin Kings anymore. That's, in fact, who he's afraid of coming after.
Oh, because that's right, because he actually violated his oath by turning.
Yes, they did not use him to flip against other Latin King members. And at least from what we've seen, there's not been any other Latin King members arrested and prosecuted where he's testified against them. But it's not on YouTube, talk about the kind of stuff he did where he's been cross-examined and whatnot. And so a lot of the type of stuff the Latin Kings have done, he's talked about, and that's violating the oath of the gang. And so that's why I perceive him having that threat. So I think he's going to be more worried about watching his own back than maybe going after the Adelsons. But you never know. I mean, you're dealing with people. He's probably killed people before. And somebody that's willing to kill multiple times like that, what's to stop him or predict who they'll kill next? Could he want to take some revenge against the Adelsons because they botched this thing, perhaps? But like I say, there's any number of folks that are going to be looking at targeting the Adelsons. You just never know when they're going to hit and how they're going to hit, but they're definitely going to feel the pressure.
Carl, if, as I believe, the Adelsons paid for Katie's defense, specifically 3 lawyers, how is it that could have gone right through Judge Hankelson's hands, and he has that one hearing and not really have done any investigation on it? How could this have happened?
Well, whatever they presented to the judge, it would have been very easy to just create an LLC, and a state like Wyoming, for example, you don't even have to describe who your owners are. Just create an LLC and just say that this LLC was distributed funds to them, and therefore it's not tied to the Adelsons. So if that's only the degree of detail that they had, something like that, the judge never called witnesses. He never wanted to have an accountant testify, or maybe if it was supposedly, let's say she inherited money, have something like that be testified before him in camera. Granted, the prosecution team of Georgia didn't get to see that, but the judge could have had that done behind camera and not have the prosecution there to really vet that out in more detail. So we just don't know what was presented, but like you're saying, if they really did pay for that, it would have been very easy for Charlie to set up like a dummy LLC, and the judge just didn't pick up on that.
And it's another reason that I'm encouraged, Carl, about the 3 proffers, because I'm going to make a bet right now that she comes clean on that, amongst other things, which is who finally paid, is the information about who really paid for her having 3 lawyers in a case where she's almost indigent.
Right.
You know, a very irregular income, and who can pay for 3 lawyers like that? Not just one trial, but 2.
But also what's very interesting is the fact that Sigfredo's attorney, Sam, I think is his name, his first name, the way you pronounce it, but he was filed for court appointment on the case, even though he was initially on the case, and he disclosed on the court forum that $15,000 of cash was paid for to get him initially on the case. So where would he have come up with $15,000 like that?
Yeah.
So was that part of the money he got for the murder potentially, or was that could have been the Adelson money as well, where they were going to fund more than just him? We just don't know, but it's just very suspicious.
Yeah, I think that was just their whole promise to Katie. Katie, don't worry, just follow our instructions, follow our lead. I'm the maestro. You can trust me, just follow my lead. And I think this is, to me, that all makes sense if you frame it that way, is that she trusted this dentist after all. She looked up to this dentist to give her the proper advice on how to do this.
Right, and I think if she did tell the truth and she explains why she did it for her kids, and that's why she lied for hours and hours in front of the trial jury, both times she was on trial, I would still use it. If I thought she was being truthful with me now, and I could trust her to tell the truth from the jury, and it had those kind of real damning, scathing details showing how involved the Adelsons were in helping protect her as well, the firewall, then I would see that being used at trial.
I do too, and I think that when she's speaking the truth, she actually speaks somewhat eloquently and with conviction, and she doesn't come across as, you know, weak on the stand. I think if she's finally telling the truth, which would be the first time in this case coming up against Charlie, that I agree with you. I think the jury would give credence to what she is saying this time.
From my experience, that's the way it works. If you get somebody that's telling the truth, it doesn't matter if they lied many times beforehand. If they have a reasonable, somewhat sympathetic story, And granted, the defense counsel says she's saying that just because she's trying to get out of a life sentence without parole. She'll lie and say anything. But if she gives enough details and concrete information, that sounds credible, and we would believe it's credible because there's some kind of communication that went on with her and Charlie at a minimum.
Yeah, and one of the things I can't wait, Carl, is to find out what was said in that conversation when she went down to South Florida on the beach. Remember that picture with her and Wendy and her friend, not Wendy's friend, but Katie's friend? She's going to be able to fill in the 3D details on that. Right now, we just see a picture, but there's no doubt in my mind, Carl, that there was planning involved down there. And if she can get into the nitty-gritty of who was there planning, was Donna there, was Harvey there, I mean, I think that's golden information.
Yeah, I'm not as convinced that the planning happened then, because I think the relationship might have been too new between her and Charlie, where that level of trust was not built up, and she was not ready to be enticed with this being set up for life financially. So, but we never know, and so that is a possibility, I'm sure. But I'm just thinking it's probably didn't happen that soon. But at least she knows who she was doing the hit for, and that'll help establish the fact that, hey, this is who you're doing it for. Help me out. We'll take care of you. All of us have high-income jobs, and you'll be set for life, kind of thing.
Just trust the maestro. Yeah, and remember in the end, remember what the judge said when Rashbaum was saying, well, we believe that the information in the proffers, vindicates my client or whatever. The judge struck that down pretty quickly and said, well, I have a different reading of it.
Yeah, I think he used the word like there was nothing incriminating against Charlie, but I didn't take that to be anything other than like grandstanding to the public, and the judge was like, made this comment like, well, there's another interpretation of that. So I took that to mean there is some incriminating information against them, as there should be if they're part of the co-conspiracy, right? So I think that will be very telling as to whether they start bringing her back as well and do an order to transfer her back. We'll probably find that out in the next probably 60 days or so.
Real quick question for you, Carl. Speaking of grandstanding, is that something you would have done if you were Rashbaum in that situation? I would think you'd lose credibility a little bit with the judge if you do that kind of nonsense.
Well, I always think it's important to have absolute credibility with the judge, and what I would have done is probably just not speak to that at all, and obviously you're filing a motion to suppress something because you're worried about that information coming out to light in front of the public. So if it was nothing negative about Charlie at all, then why would you file a motion to keep it sealed like that? So there's obviously some smoke there that he was trying to cover up some more flames and maybe big flames at that are against Charlie. So,
Carl, when do we find out, if you know, when or if Katie will be used by the prosecution in the trial in this fall? Would we find out just the day she's called up on the stand, or do they have to give the defense a witness list?
She'd be on the witness list, and would also see like an order to transfer her out of the state custody, or a letter, at least from the state attorney's office, saying, hey, bring her back to Leon County Jail during these dates so she's available to testify.
So we'll have basically lead time to know that Katie will be testifying.
Right. I mean, they don't have to necessarily call her for sure, but if they intend to call her and she's on the witness list, then they'll make those arrangements, have her transported.
And you're saying if you're the prosecutor in this case, you definitely would call her?
Well, it all depends if she's got something favorable there, and if she's got some corroboration. I mean, you don't, as a prosecutor, want to call somebody on the witness stand that you know is going to lie and lie before the jury, and just let that evidence sort of lay there for them to be considered as something you believe to be the truth. So that would be a sort of a disconnect between what your duty is as a prosecutor and your role to present justice and ask for justice by the jury.
So, Carl, with one of Dan Markel's sons' bar mitzvah coming up, if, as I suspect, the Markels in Canada will not be invited to that, if that happens, what message does that send the jury coming up in Charlie's trial this fall? What message does that send the prosecution? What goes through your head when you think of that happening And do you think, as I do, that that's probably going to be the case?
Well, I don't think that's really a relevant issue for this upcoming trial with Charlie. I think it's another piece of information that I would use as a prosecutor if I was prosecuting a case like Wendy's to show the cruelty of punishing the children, because the more you can show she's willing to punish the children, and then you show it over a consistent long period of time, the more that actually shows the hatred, and the more you show the hatred, the more you show the fact that she would have been a likely person that would want to have Dan killed and be a part of the planning. And then you bring out all the levels of indicators of involvement, and that just helps paint the picture of Dan was to be eliminated, the Markells were to be eliminated. They don't want any memory of Dan around. If you don't want any memory of your kid's father around, what does that say about you as a parent? I mean, that's about as cruel, cold, and evil as you can get as a parent.
Especially such sweet people as Dan's parents, Ruth and Phil Markell and Shelley and the family. They've done nothing wrong. They just want to see the kids. They already have the pain of having lost Dan himself. Now to do that.
Well, I find that hard to believe that they would be that low, that Wendy would be that low. And if it was Donna calling the shots on that, to allow that to happen, I mean, that would just be, that's really helping seal your own fate at your own trial. So why she would do that makes it just so blatantly obvious. And I think that would motivate a prosecutor to make sure they get justice and get it sooner, because this is, I mean, it's basically, they know who did the crimes, but they're almost treating this like a cold case murder where they don't know who did the crime. And so for this to drag on that long is just such an outrage and really, really disappointing.
Yeah, and I think that will really resonate with a jury when, on top of all this other stuff, they go, wait a minute, this aging couple and the grandparents in Canada, you're denying them contact too? How cruel and vicious are you? If I was on a jury, and I've been on 3 criminal trial juries, I'd be going, whoa, that's a small piece of the puzzle, but it's a big one, because it would show me just how it wasn't just hatred about Dan, Carl, it was hatred about the entire family tree, that this family wanted to erase the entire, or try to chop down basically the boy's family tree if it started with the word Markell on it.
Everything having to do with Markells was to be eliminated.
Correct.
And this is part of that campaign. And so it's like I say, it's a real dagger against Wendy's behavior more so than anybody else. So I would expect that to be used like in a prosecution against Wendy.
Yeah, and don't forget, there was a 6-year period where Ruth and Phil were not allowed to see the boys at all. 6 years. That's a long time. And to me, that just shows what vitriol and hatred she was carrying around in her heart. And I bet you she still is carrying that around in her heart today.
If any prosecutor had any doubt that the Adelsons were involved, that alone to me would just be like another smoking gun type of evidence of the hatred and the desire to have Dan eliminated at any and all costs.
Carl, do you think that Donna and Harvey Adelson will stay in South Florida if Charlie's convicted in November?
Well, I think there's a good chance they may be deciding to leave the country, go to a country that they have no extradition agreement with the United States, especially if they're getting bump threats and those kind of things against Charlie. But they're going to have to pick up stakes and leave everybody behind. Maybe Wendy would join them. Just don't know, but their whole lives are going to be in turmoil in so many different ways that it's another reason why I would probably be expecting them to be prosecuted sooner than later.
I think that once Charlie's convicted, the fear in their hearts of being next and not knowing if it's Donna or Wendy, they're going to have to be thinking already, well, our finances, we're going to have to defend ourselves. Even if we're innocent or are found innocent, we're going to have to defend ourselves. That's going to be another $1 million per defense. You said another video, but we'll reiterate it here again. You believe that within a few months after Charlie's conviction that they're going to be putting their condo or house on the market.
Right, and it may be to leave the country too, because they realize they're about to be bumped or have been bumped and threatened, and And they may wind up just having to leave Charlie fighting for his own life in the state prison, and they're going to pull stakes and have no contact with him other than mail from another country. It's a real pressure cooker in their lives, and it's going to be an absolute nightmare.
Carl, as a prosecutor, how gun-shy are you about pursuing a case that you could possibly lose?
Well, the nice thing about being a prosecutor is that you can hold all the cards on how you dispose of the case with justice as you see justice. And if I know someone is absolutely guilty, I've done my homework, there's no doubt in my mind they're guilty, then I'm going after them. And so if they want to go toe-to-toe and go to trial, I'm not going to be worried about an acquittal, because acquittal would be such a rare occurrence to happen, because I'll have all my ducks in a row. I'll be destroying them with truth. So they're going to be on the downhill side of the evidence before the jury, because I'll have the upper hand, because I'll have truth on my side. So smoke bombs, smoke grenades, confusion bombs, all these kind of things that defense counsel do to zealously represent their client, those kind of things are never going to be so as effective as against the truth. And so if you have the truth on your side as a prosecutor, you just go forward and don't worry about the consequences like that. And even, let's say if there's a case where you lose that you were expected to win for some reason, and you felt like you completely lost something that was within your grasp, a conviction, there's actually never a true loss completely, because especially if somebody's paid for all the attorneys, they've had to spend an enormous amount of money to defend themselves, and you at least took it to the mat and did everything you could to aggressively go after justice for the victims. And if you've done all that and you don't get the outcome you want, even then you've done the right thing. So what I don't like to see is prosecutors that are afraid to go to trial unless they know for sure they got a slam dunk, like a conviction, confession, things of the overwhelming forensic evidence, that kind of thing that set them up for success. Because you got to take some of the tougher ones, or maybe the more circumstantial ones, because those have a high degree of conviction as well, circumstantial ones. So for example, like in Wendy's situation, there is a huge amount of circumstantial evidence to show her involved in the planning, and this was a family affair. So to me, that would be never an excuse to not go to trial in a case like that. Like you were worried that you weren't going to get a conviction, because if you lay all the information out there, the juries do the right thing. And when you have the truth on your side, defense counsel trying to poke holes, it's like death by 1,000 cuts. I mean, you can try to plug certain gaps of bleeding, but in the end, you're still going to bleed out and die. So you got to go for the jugular. You got to be aggressive, and you'll have success.
Plus, when you're on the prosecution side, Carl, and you know you have the facts, doesn't that give you a shot of confidence in the courtroom the entire time, knowing that you're pursuing justice, you're pursuing the facts. You're not playing these games that defense so often has to do to try to throw a confusion bomb.
A good prosecutor will be able to spin it around and actually take away credibility from the defense counsel, because they'll be throwing up arguments that are just preposterous, ludicrous, and outright laughable at times.
And you can call them out, can't you?
So,
like in your final
in your arguments, oh sure, yeah. I call out every single time I go to trial. I call out my opponent and say they know they don't have the truth on their side, and I'll say, because they won't talk about X, Y, and Z, and every single time my opponent has never once brought up X, Y, and Z, because they know. And then I say, and if they don't bring that up, they know they got a loser of a case if they don't bring it up, because they can't bring it up. It makes no sense. Like for example, Charlie's Dolce Vita tape. If they try to argue how that was really a sign of innocence, I mean, they have no credibility to stand on.
And specifically, Carl's talking about when Charlie says in there, "Oh, but we didn't do it, of course."
If you listen to the whole tape, it is so obvious they're talking about being involved in the murder of Dan Markell, and there's enough information there that you cannot put a spin on that and have a jury buy into it. So. I think also jury selection is important. Make sure you have jurors that are focused on doing justice. They're not going to be distracted, and they don't have some other agendas. Like, for example, the hung jury with Katie. That was probably not a good idea to have the one holdout member that voted for not guilty for Katie in the first trial, because this person had what I would perceive as sort of like an agenda to pursue, because she had, from what I understand, spiked hair and looked sort of like someone that was like against the government kind of mentality, sort of an anarchist of sorts. So you don't ever want to have something like that on a jury if you're a prosecutor. As a defense counsel, you like that, but not as a prosecutor. So you just got to be smart about who you allow to sit on the jury, and make sure you flesh out the people's views and attitudes. Because a lot of times what I see is attorneys do not want to get into a lot of details. They're very uncomfortable doing voir dire with the jury members, and they just want to get over it. So instead of using that time to really educate yourself about each juror and knowing whether they're actually going to be having a reasonable mind or not, a lot of attorneys just want to get through it. They just have a stock series of questions, and they're just wanting to hurry up and call the first witness and get to their opening statement. So that's like a really bad move for prosecutors or defense counsel to do. You gotta really get to know who you have on the jury.